All right, Chapter 9 starts our chapter on measurement. And so for some of you, some of the stuff in here is going to be review, but for a lot of you, you may not have seen this in a long time, and so it's going to just take a little bit of a refresher. But we are eventually going to talk about the metric system, but we're going to start with the English system, which is what we use here in the U.S. Now, on your handout, you actually have the complete chart for the English system conversions, where one of them is 12 inches equals 1 foot, and then you know that 3 feet equals 1 yard, and then what else is in that chart? 5,280 feet equals 1 mile, and I don't remember if I missed something in that chart. Thank you. 36 inches is 1 yard. And so if you needed to convert 7 feet to inches, a lot of you guys are pretty comfortable with this. Since we're converting from a larger unit to a smaller unit, we're going to multiply what we know about feet to inches. Okay, so we have 7 feet. And we know that there are 12 inches in 1 foot, so we want to multiply 7 times 12. And so you multiply and you get 84 inches in a foot. Now, had we been converting from a smaller unit to a larger unit, then we would have divided our units. Now, this is the old way of doing things. We're not really going to focus too much on this method because I'm going to teach you a new method that's going to help no matter what system we're in. We could be going from English to metric, metric to English, and so on. And so using dimensional analysis, we can convert without having to think, is this a smaller unit or a larger unit? You know, how am I supposed to multiply or divide? So learning this method will actually work it all out for you. Now, if you've taken chemistry or something like that, you may have already seen dimensional analysis before, because this is something when you're converting any type of units, thinking about chemical units and so on, and what you might see there. So to convert a measure to a different unit, the first thing you have to do is multiply what you're given by a unit fraction, or maybe you're going to use more than one unit fraction. Now, a unit fraction is made when you take what you know about your conversions, like, for example, 12 inches and 1 foot. You just make a fraction out of those numbers, 12 inches and 1 foot. So it could be 12 over 1, or it could be 1 over 12. Now, the way to figure out what order it's supposed to be in is step 2. The given unit of measurement should appear in the denominator of the unit fraction so that the unit cancels upon multiplication. The unit of measurement that needs to be introduced should appear in the numerator of the fraction so that this unit will be retained upon multiplication. So in the last one, it was 7 feet to inches. And since feet was what was given, then to create our unit fraction, we would put feet in the denominator. We needed to introduce inches, so inches would be in the numerator. So it would be 12 inches over 1 foot. And that would be our unit fraction. This looks really wordy, but then once we do it, it's going to be very straightforward. Okay, so you're filling the blanks there. We're given denominator to be introduced and numerator. Okay, so this is the one we discussed already. So 12 inches equals 1 foot creates 2 unit fractions. You could either have 12 inches over 1 foot or 1 foot over 12 inches. So basically, you're taking what you know from the chart and you're making a fraction out of it. So if you had the part of the chart that said 5,280 feet equals 1 mile, then what fractions could we create? Okay, 5,280 feet over 1 mile, or flip it over, and 1 mile over 5,280 feet. So you could have just make a fraction out of the two numbers. The order depends on what the original problem is. okay, the problem you're trying to solve. So let's go ahead and apply dimensional analysis to a problem. So we're going to use the 12 inches equals 1 foot again. And this time we want to convert 40 inches to feet. Okay, in order to work this problem, the first thing you're going to do is look at what's given, 40 inches. And you're going to write that down. And you're always going to put this over 1 so that you can see it in the form of a fraction. Okay, so whatever you're given, just put it over 1. Now you're going to multiply it by a unit fraction, and you're going to use the 12 inches equals 1 foot because you're converting inches to feet. Now, whatever you're given, we were given inches, that should appear in the denominator. That should always be diagonal from what you started with. And then what you're trying to get, feet, should be up top. Now, the reason it should be diagonal is so that way when you multiply, those are going to cancel out, and you don't have any inches anymore. So then you just plug in the numbers. So we know that 1 foot equals 12 inches. And now you just have to multiply your fractions. Okay, so inches cancel. And you get 40. 40 times 1 is 40 over 12 feet. And then you need to simplify that. So notice you didn't have to think about, am I going to multiply by the 12 or am I going to divide by the 12? Dimensional analysis went ahead and set it up the way that you need to do it. As long as you just put those units diagonal from each other, it'll all work out for itself. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can simplify this number. Now, being that we're in measurements now, fractions and mixed numbers do work in here. You do use mixed numbers a lot when it comes to measurements. And so simplifying across, waiting for that to clear. Okay. All right, so simplifying across, I got 3 1/3 feet because 12 goes into 43 with a remainder of 4. And then 4 over 12 reduces to 1/3. Okay, so because we want to convert 40 inches to feet, feet should appear in the numerator and inches in the denominator of that unit fraction. So you're going to have quite a few problems to start out with that are like this, 40 inches to feet, or you might have 12 feet to yards. Okay, so many feet to miles. I know that you guys, if you grew up in this country, you practice using the divide or multiply system, but I want you to practice the dimensional analysis so that you get more comfortable when these problems get a little bit more complex. Okay, so that's the first part of this section, is learning that dimensional analysis. Let's go ahead and do that again. So this time we're going to convert 9 inches to yards, so I'm focused on the fact that 36 inches equals 1 yard. Okay, now you have a statement, if you have your handout, you have a statement with fill in the blanks, and see if you can figure this out. It says to convert 9 inches to yards, blank should appear in the numerator and blank in the denominator, and we're talking about the unit fraction. So you're filling it in with a unit. So is it inches or yards? Which one should appear in the numerator? And which one should appear in the denominator? Okay, so sometimes it's easier to start with the denominator because notice that we're given 9 inches. And so I'm talking about the unit fraction with those fill in the blanks. Okay, so I know that what I start with should appear in the bottom, go diagonal. So inches is in the denominator, therefore yards has to be in the numerator. Okay, so those are your fill in the blank. Yards in the numerator, inches in the denominator. Okay, so inches down here, yards up here, and so therefore we have 1 over 36, and then you can just go ahead and work out the problem. Okay, so you end up with 1/4 of a yard. Now sometimes decimals will be appropriate in this instance. Okay, sometimes decimals are, like 1/4 would convert to an exact decimal, 0.25 yards. So just pay attention in Math Excel to what it's asking you for. Is it asking you for an integer or a fraction, or is it asking you for a decimal? But you want to try and go with the exact answer. So if the fraction is the exact answer, if you tried to convert it to a decimal, you'd have to round. That's no longer exact. Okay? All right, so only round if it specifically tells you to round. So any questions on working this problem out? Okay, so here's your next one. Convert 13,200 feet to miles. And so we know that 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. So you try to do the dimensional analysis on your own here. Okay, so we're trying to go from feet to miles, so that means miles should appear in the numerator and feet in the denominator. And so hopefully when you set up your dimensional analysis, it looks like this. 13,200 feet, we can put it over 1, multiply by 1 mile over 5,280 feet. And so the feet cancel, telling us that we're going to divide 13,200 by 5280. Okay, so you guys are probably familiar with, miles and how it's given. And typically with miles, we do use decimal values. And so, whatever's the most familiar with those units is probably what you're going to be asked to give. So here it would equal 2.5 miles. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the metric system. Those of you that grew up in another country, you're probably really familiar with the metric system because most of the world uses the metric system. So we like to write a metric line to do our conversions. And because in the section 9.1 we're talking about measurements of length, then the basic unit of length in the metric system is the meter. Okay, so a lowercase m is going to stand for meters, which is when you see miles, you're going to see mi for miles. Now, usually this looks like a number line, but in the PowerPoint it didn't put the hash marks. And so starting in the middle, you've got meters. As you work to the left, you're getting to a bigger unit, and this is decameters. Sometimes you'll see this with a capital D, but this book likes to use DA for deca. So decameters, hectometers, kilometers, or kilometers, however you'd like to pronounce that. And then going to the right, we get smaller to decimeters, centimeters, millimeters. The metric system works on multiples of 10. And so each unit that is one step away from the other is equal to 10 of those units. So if we start with a millimeter, which is the smallest, well, there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter. There are 10 centimeters in a decimeter. There are 10 decimeters in a meter, 10 meters in a decameter, 10 decameters in a hectometer, 10 hectometers in a kilometer or kilometer. Okay? So it all works on tens. So being that there's 10 millimeters in a centimeter, well, millimeters to decimeters, that's 10 times 10. So there's 100 millimeters in a decimeter. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000, so there are 1,000 millimeters in a meter, and so on. Okay, so because we're working by tens, that actually makes conversion in the metric system very simple. Because when you multiply a number by 10, then that means you're moving your decimal over to the right for many multiples of 10 that you have. If you're dividing by a multiple of 10, then that means you're moving your decimal to the left that many spaces. Okay? So if you're going from a larger to a small, you've got to, depends. If you're going from larger to smaller, you're going to the right and you're multiplying. If you're going from smaller to larger, you're going to the left and you're dividing by that multiple of 10. Okay, so here are your steps for converting in the metric system. So to change from a larger unit to a smaller unit, notice that you are moving to the right on this metric line, the way the metric line is designed. Well, then that means you're multiplying by 10, or you're moving your decimal point one place to the right for each smaller unit that's desired. So in other words, if you're moving from hectometers to meters, that means you start from here and you go to the right 1, 2 spaces to the right. And so that's going to tell you that you have to move your decimal point 2 spaces to the right. So that's the value of this metric line. If you can memorize the order of how this goes, then it'll tell you how many places you're supposed to move your decimal and in which direction. Okay, let's say you're going in the opposite direction. If you're changing from a smaller unit to a larger unit, let's say you're going from centimeters to kilometers. Well, that means that you're moving this way in your metric line, centimeters to kilometers. And so you're going to move your decimal to the left for each unit until you've reached the desired unit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places to the left. So in your number, you have to move your decimal 5 places to the left. Okay, so here's our metric line, and there's a few ways to remember the order of how the metric line goes. Okay, so there's going to be 7, if you look at this like a number line, you can draw a number line with 7 hash marks on it, where meter is in the middle. There's going to be 3 to the left and 3 to the right. Okay, one way to remember the order of the prefixes, because there's kilo, hecto, deca, then you just have meter, then deci, centi, milli. So there is a saying, as some of you guys might remember it, it's King Henry died Monday drinking chocolate milk. Okay, and that reminds you of all of those first abbreviations. So King Henry died Monday drinking chocolate milk. Now, granted, died is a DA, okay, so it's not perfect on there. But you got to remember that deca is bigger, so it's to the left of meter. Deci is smaller, it's to the right. And then you can just draw your metric line each time, remembering those that little phrase. So our phonetic or mnemonic device. So if we want to convert 53 meters to millimeters, so first of all, meters is in the middle, and millimeters is to the right. How many spaces to the right? 3. Okay, so identify where your decimal is currently in the number. Do you see a decimal in 53? No, so you assume that it's behind the 3. Good, at the end. Okay, so from meters, we're moving 3 places to the right. And right now, our decimal is at the end. So 3 places to the right would put our new decimal here. And then whenever you have little blank spaces, you're supposed to fill in a 0 into those spots. Okay, so that gives us 53,000 millimeters. So 53 meters is the same as 53,000 millimeters. Okay, let's say we're doing 60.4 centimeters to hectometers. Okay, so centimeters is right here. Oops, let me start with red. And we're going to hectometers, so that means we're going where? Okay, so from centimeters, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4 places to the left. So looking at 60.4, we already have a decimal in the number, so start from that decimal. So going 4 places to the left, here's where our new decimal is, and we only have 2 blank spots this time, so fill in 2 zeros, and we get 0.00604 hectometers. Do not round your answer unless it specifically tells you to round. Okay, leave all of the digits that you see in there. Okay, and then it goes into the difference between English and metric units. So 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters, and 1 foot is equal to 30.48 centimeters. Now the next 2 ones in your chart are actually approximations. They fixed it in the new edition of the book, but the PowerPoint still has the old, that it kept an equal sign in here. This should really be an approximately equal sign. okay, because those units have been rounded. So 1 yard is approximately 0.9 meters, and 1 mile is approximately 1.6 kilometers. Okay, so let's say that you are given a problem where you need to convert 8 feet to centimeters. So this is where you go back to that chart, and you have to say, well, what do you know about feet and centimeters? And according to that chart, we just saw that 1 foot is equal to 30.48 centimeters. So this is where you're, because you're working in 2 different systems, you might say, I don't remember when I'm supposed to multiply or divide. And this is how dimensional analysis can really just help you work out the problem. So we're starting out with 8 feet, so we're going to put 8 feet over 1. And now we need to make our unit fraction for what we know about feet and centimeters. Okay, so where should I put my units? Okay, feet on the bottom, so therefore that leaves centimeters to the top. Okay, because you're always going to go diagonal with what you start with. So filling in our numbers, we've got 30.48 over 1. And now you know that you're supposed to multiply. So the feet cancel and do 8 times 30.48. Okay, so you get 243.84 centimeters. We only had a 1 in the denominator, so we can drop that. And there is your answer. And this is exact because those conversions between feet and centimeters were exact. Okay, so let's do 20 meters to yards. So we know that 1 yard is approximately 0.9 meters. So we're starting with 20 meters over 1. And so how should we form our unit fraction? 1 yard over 0.9 meters. Good. Okay, your meters cancel. So that leaves you to divide 20 divided by 0.9, so you get approximately 22.22 yards. Notice that you barely used your calculator at all for Chapter 3. You're going to be using your calculator a lot for Chapter 9. So make sure that you have that handy while you're doing stuff. And then you'll have some questions that ask you, what's the most appropriate unit to use? Trying to get you familiar with the metric system if you're not already. So your choices are millimeter, meter, or kilometer. What unit would you use to measure the length of a football field? Meters. Yeah, meters is it. So yards wasn't a choice because we're looking at the metric system, but we would typically use yards, and meters is the closest thing to yards. Okay, so how about the distance from New York to DC? Okay, kilometers. And then the width of a human foot? Millimeters. Okay, so meters is about this big, okay, so that would be, not helpful for your foot, so millimeters is your answer. Now, by the way, there are a couple problems in your homework that ask you to convert an English unit to a metric unit where you don't have the exact comparison in your chart. So you might have to go, a couple different ways to get there. You might have to go to what's closest in the chart and then convert again to that unit that you're going to. So do your best on those. There's just a couple of those problems that will be more challenging.